I would like to welcome you all to Swan Hill for this important occasion. Our nation has always stood ready to protect democratic principles whenever they are challenged. The men and women of our nation have answered the call, and sadly many have paid the ultimate sacrifice to preserve freedom and our way of life. Council does not wish to put any wartime sacrifice ahead of another, but it does wish to acknowledge the sacrifice made by members of the Hutchins family. History records that the loss of 4 brothers from the same family is indeed the single greatest loss experienced as a result of Australian participation in the theatres of war. Like so many during World War II, the Hutchins brothers enlisted when called to do so. 7 of the 9 brothers saw action against the enemy in Papua New Guinea. Of the 7, only 3 returned to Australia. Today's ceremony commemorates the Hutchins brothers' service and sacrifices made. Through the memorial, the Hutchins brothers' story can be preserved for the future generations to be acknowledged. Swan Hill Rural City Council thanks all members of the Hutchins family for allowing this story to be told, and we trust today's ceremony has honoured the memory of brothers who served their country so bravely. I'd also like to make a special thank you to all the work Mr. Paul Liversidge's done on behalf of the family. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Colonel David Shields. Thank you.
Myrtle and Mary, members of the extended Hutchins family, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying how privileged I am to be here today with you, representing Lieutenant General Peter Lay, the Chief of Army. Australia is not a militarist nation, but we do have a strong military heritage. And prior to 1948, that heritage was based on the civilian soldier. Through the 2 great wars of the last century, Australia formed the 1st and the 2nd Australian Imperial Force to deploy beyond Australia and its territories to fight and defend our national interests. It was to the 2nd Australian Imperial Force that the 7 Hutchins brothers enlisted, 3 in 1940 and 4 in 1941. Those first enlistees travelled to the Middle East and fought with the 9th and 7th Divisions in the Middle East, Syria, North Africa, and returned to Australia to regroup and then be sent into our nearer region, into New Guinea, to be there for the final victory over the Japanese. The other 4 brothers were sent as part of Gull and Lark forces in the immediate aftermath of the Japanese invasion and the entry of Japan into the Second World War to defend Ambon and New Britain. There's no question that those men were sent away hurriedly, to an extent unprepared, but they went away and they did their duty. They went to Ambon, and there they faced 17,000 Japanese Marines. They went to New Britain, and there they faced 20,000 Japanese Marines. They were overrun, they were killed, they were captured, or they died in captivity. In fact, history tells us that some were murdered by the Japanese in the immediate aftermath of that occupation of Ambon. These men were behaving and according and passing on the heritage of Anzac that we all value so highly. They were volunteers. They gave up their life at home. They decided of their own free will to go with their mates to join the Australian Imperial Force and to deploy beyond Australia's shores to protect our national interests. They did that knowingly, willingly, and with their mates beside them. They displayed the values that the Australian soldier displays today around the world of courage, initiative and teamwork. There is no greater love than for a man to give up his life for his brother. And in the case of the Hutchins brothers, that sacrifice has been well and truly reinforced and driven home by virtue of the fact that they are the single greatest loss of a single family in our history. To the Hutchins family, to Mary and Myrtle, on behalf of the Chief of Army, thank you for your brother's contribution to the security and defence of our nation. There were some people here, and I read a newspaper article recently which discussed or hypothesised that their loss was a waste. It wasn't a waste. Because if you look at the diaries and you understand what was happening at the same time as Gull Force and Lark Force were being overrun in Ambon and New Britain, you'll understand that our militia battalions were fighting hammer and nail for their survival in Kokoda. And had we not had those forces away from New Guinea, it's quite likely that that 35,000 additional Japanese Marines would have been in a position to overrun the forces that were in Kokoda. I'd ask those of you who are not students of history to reflect on the nature of the operations that the Hutchins brothers were involved in during their period in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force. To understand the bonds that exist between soldiers, sailors and airmen on operations, and to understand that the tradition and the heritage of volunteer service to the nation, of commitment to the nation, of dedication to the nation, is one that we should all appreciate and, if necessary, strive to emulate. It's a great privilege to be here, to represent the Chief of Army on this occasion, to join with Myrtle and Mary and the extended Hutchins family as we commemorate the sacrifice of 7 of the Hutchins brothers, 4 of the Hutchins brothers, and the commitment and contribution of the entire family to the defence of Australia. Thank you.